The Russian war in Ukraine has changed everything we knew about modern warfare, from the way nations mobilize their people and industries to how cheap drones and long-range strikes can shift the balance on the battlefield. Today I'm joined by retired Australian Major General Mick Ryan to talk about what the world and especially Europe would learn from Ukraine, how to prepare, how much to invest and what kind of war we may face next. General Ryan, it's a pleasure to have you here offline in Kyiv.
It's great to be back in Kyiv and it's great to talk to you again.
It's always such a pleasure to meet with people who genuinely interested not only in the Russian war in Ukraine, but also in Ukraine itself, you know, and its development. So thank you for that. To be honest, I want to start with your latest study. I found it very interesting. I'm just tell to the viewers that it's named Translating Ukraine Lessons for the Pacific Theater. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
So basically you identified key takeaways from this Russian war in Ukraine, and you in simple words helping to understand what the world have to learn from this Russian war right now.
Yes.
So let's talk about mobilization. That what caught me, and it's very interesting was to read. But I will look at my notes because it's going to help me. It's some words are a bit complicated for me. So you say in your research that mass matters again. So what does mobilization really mean in 2025? So not Soviet-style conscription, but democratic mobilization. How do countries prepare people and industries for defense without breaking their societies?
Well, I think first and foremost, the most important part of mobilisation is government has to explain why it's happening to the people, to explain the purpose for mobilising military, mobilising industry. So that's important, having purpose. I think then you look at, you have to mobilise people. Some of it is people going into the military. That's very important to expand the military, just as Ukraine did in 2022 and continues to do. There's lots of ways you can do that. You can do it through draft, through volunteer service, through calling out reserves. But it's not just military. You need to mobilise emergency services. You need to mobilise your society as a whole so it understands that the world you were in before the war no longer exists. You're in a different world. You're in a world where, unfortunately, your whole country is at war and everyone has a part. So mobilising people is important, but it's not just military. And, of course, then you have mobilising industry to shift industry from making some things that aren't as important anymore to things that are important, be it drones, be it missiles, be it munitions or trucks, socks and body armour.
But you think what comes first at this mobilization order? It's a manpower, it's a weapons, or is that a mindset?
The mindset is the most important thing, is having leadership who helps the population deal with the fact they have to very quickly shift from being in peacetime to being in wartime. And for the vast majority of humans, that's very traumatic. So good leaders help them deal with the trauma of moving from peace to war. And I think, that's what we saw from President Zelensky right at the start of the war. One, he stayed in Ukraine. And two, he was talking to the people of Ukraine from the very first day of what was happening, and this is what we need to do.
So leadership decides who survives?
Well, I think leadership provides purpose for everybody. They don't necessarily decide who survives, but good leadership can be critical in deciding whether you win or lose a war.
But what makes a good commander or president effective under constant pressure?
I think there's a few things. One, that they're good communicators. Like you're a good communicator. You talk to your audience. You talk to people here to have a good conversation and to be able to explain to people what is happening and why tough measures. You're kind of the explainer-in-chief as the president. I think you need to be relatable to a wide array of people. I mean, a country is made of lots of different people, and as a president, you need to relate to farmers to people who work in a factory, to military people, to rich, to poor, to children, to old people. So you need to be relatable. And I think you need to have good endurance. You need to be able to work very long hours, keep you cool, keep a sense of humour. And I think by and large, we've seen that from President Zelensky, and we've seen it from great leaders in history.
General Ryan, when you talk about the mindset, don't you think it's super complicated to shift people's mindset, especially those? Let's remember the beginning of the February 2022. Everybody was screaming that the Russian will attack. The Russian soldiers, hundreds of thousands, they were next to Ukrainian border. And I was among those people who didn't believe they will attack. Despite the fact that they annexed Crimea, despite the fact they started a war in 2014 in Donbass, I still didn't believe that rockets will fly over Ukrainian cities and will kill so many civilians, kids. So the question is how to change that mindset in the countries that could not even imagine that could happen to them because they are not having any border with Russia.
Well, I think first it's worth realising that what you thought is not a bad thing. It's like, it's good to think the best of humans, but then you need people like me who don't, who can anticipate the worst. And I think good leaders hope that most of their people think like you, but also have a few people in the military, in the intelligence services, who understand that despite our best hopes, we also have to plan for the worst. We have to imagine the worst that might happen, be it war, be it pandemics, be it natural disasters, and ensure the country, the military, the emergency services are all prepared for that worst case. I think you saw, say, in General Zaluzhny, he did a lot of preparations to disperse forces and those kind of things to make sure that the Ukrainian forces had a fighting chance in the early hours. But at the end of the day, it's very hard to prepare for something like what the Russians did in the modern era, when most of the citizens, not just here but around the world, think that war isn't possible in the 21st century.
You often write that to be ready for the war, for modern armies need both technologies and mass. And how much should Europe spend to be ready for any kind of invasion? So is that 3% of GDP, is that enough?
I think 3% is not going to be enough. I think they've committed to 5%, but 1.5% of that is infrastructure and civil defence, which is good, you know. So, 3.5% on military, another 1.5% on civil defence, infrastructure hardening, I think is a really good measure. My country is not spending that. I'm an advocate for us to spend much, much more than what we are. So, to deter countries like Russia, China, North Korea, we really need to be spending around the 3 to 5% of GDP for a little while to come, because that will be cheaper than spending 30% of a GDP in a war if we don't deter it. And that's where Ukraine is.
Yeah, true. But if you could advise European leaders where to spend their first billions, where it will be, ammunition, air defense, drones and anti-drone systems, long-range missiles?
I think part of it would be weapons. Part of it would be investing in the people and infrastructure to be able to expand their military quickly. So you need to have trainers, you need to have more bases so you can build your military like you did from 250,000 to 1 million people very quickly. That takes training, that takes bases, and part of your initial spend has to be kind of priming the pump to expand your military forces.
Yeah. I've just recently heard the quote, and I realized this is true, that the modern war, the Russian war in Ukraine, it's not what we knew about the war. It's not the war we were reading in the books. When you have a battlefield, a front line, basically, and you have the one army from one side, the other army on the other side. And now with the drones, the front line is completely different. could you describe, do you have your perspective of a modern front line nowadays?
Well, it really depends on the geography. I mean, Eastern Europe is very different to, say, Africa, which is different to the Pacific. But the war in Ukraine at the moment has many elements of every war that's gone before it. That it's full of human suffering and tragedy. It demands good leadership. That, you know, there are different weapons that come into play at different times. Armies are used, air forces, navies are used. So there's lots of old lessons that we're relearning, but a couple of the new ones. Firstly, drones. I don't think anyone expected the huge explosion in the use of drones that we've seen the last 3.5 years. No one expected 4 years ago that Ukraine would be building 2 to 3 million drones a year. I mean, that was almost unthinkable as the war itself was. So I think that employment of drones in the air, on the ground, at sea, has certainly transformed parts of warfare. I think artificial intelligence is the other one. That's truly new, and it is changing a whole range of things from battlefield targeting all the way through to logistics, personnel, intelligence, planning for these wonderful long-range strikes into Russia. So those two things, drones and AI, are very new, but there's a whole lot of other things that have gone before that are old, but we forgot about.
Do you think that every modern army have to have, just well-trained, dedicated drone battalion in their system, in their structure? We
all need more drones, but drones alone are not going to win wars, and even for Ukraine, drones alone don't. If you talk to Ukrainian soldiers, drones are extraordinary. They're very important, but you still need soldiers. You still need artillery. You still need trucks and armoured vehicles and medics and everything else that go with it.
So basically, drones will not replace anything. They're just a part of the war that will not replace any tanks.
What drones do is they extend the capability of humans and military units. So you may sometimes have less humans because of drones in certain places, but they never fully replace them. Drones can't hold ground, for example. So what they do is extend human capacity rather than replace it in many instances.
We'll get back to that one, actually. But now I want to talk about, the question that everybody's talking about, and you also touched that one already, about Tomahawks. That the American president still cannot decide whether give them to us or not. General Ryan, do you think that Tomahawk presence in Ukraine will be a serious game changer, and what we should do with them?
Well, I don't think Tomahawks will fundamentally change the direction of the war. They'll be very useful. Don't get me wrong. I would love to see Ukraine get lots of Tomahawks. I think their biggest impact, however, will be political, as Trump is using them to shift Putin's calculus in the war. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Putin is set that he thinks he can win. He clearly can't. Ukraine's shown that. But Trump thinks he can shift Putin's view by dangling the prospect of Tomahawks to Ukraine. I think Ukraine will probably get some Tomahawks. I hope it does. But with things like the Flamingo, with all the other drones that Ukraine has developed, I think Tomahawks will be important but won't be silver bullets. I think what is more important is the intelligence that's provided by the Americans as well as other NATO countries to complement the intelligence that the military intelligence and other services of Ukraine are collecting for these long-range strikes.
Okay, but if you would advise, or what is your advice for the numbers of Tomahawks? Because I've just been on the press conference of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and we were asking, he's going to meet American President
this
in
Friday.
A day. Yeah, yes. In a days. And he said that he told him what numbers we need, but he said it's not a telephone talk. That's why they will have a private talk in Washington, D.C. What numbers do you see as good for us?
Well, there's the possible numbers, which is probably somewhere up to 100. But then for me...
Oh, God, 100.
It would be, you should get hundreds I mean, to have a significant impact, it would take hundreds of Tomahawks plus Flamingos plus all the other drones and hybrid cruise missiles that Ukraine has developed. So I would love to see Ukraine get hundreds of Tomahawks. I don't know whether America is prepared to do that.
Do they have so many?
They do have a lot, but they also have a lot for other contingencies in the Middle East, for American contingencies against Russia and for American contingencies against China. They are having to build their magazine of munitions up because they've looked at the war in Ukraine and gone, boy, we need to build our stocks up as well.
Yeah. Well, I thought even, I thought that people in Russia really scared of us having Tomahawks because the reaction of Medvedev or reaction of Belarusian dictator Lukashenko, they kind of scared. I don't remember when they were so pissed off by something.
That's a good thing because a weapon having a psychological impact is positive because the Russian people being scared has an impact on Putin. I don't think it's going to change his mind because he's been happy to see over 1 million of his own citizens killed or wounded in this war. But the psychological impact of those kind of weapons is important. I think we saw HIMARS in its first few months have a fairly significant psychological impact on the Russian operations in eastern Ukraine.
Was it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but now gradually over time that diminished. I also think the psychological impact of Ukraine killing so many generals, Russian generals, early on was important. But once again, you can normalise that and people get used to it. So these kind of weapons, they have a political impact, that's important. They have a military impact, but we should never forget the psychological impact of these things. Let's not forget, Russia is bombing Ukraine every single night, not for military reasons, but to impose a psychological toll on the Ukrainian people. Why shouldn't Ukraine be doing the same against Russia?
General Ryan, have you had a chance to speak with the Russian generals? Do you track what they're posting? Do you have any interest to, to read something there or...
I've obviously read a lot of Russian doctrine, those kind of things, and follow what they're doing, but I do not travel there. I'm banned in Russia.
You're banned in Russia?
I was banned in Russia in the middle of 2022 because of my stance in support of Ukraine and writing about the war.
Yes.
So, yes, I can't go to Russia. That does not trouble me. But I try and follow the developments in their tactics, their doctrine, and you've got to understand your enemy. Which I think Ukrainian generals understand the Russians better than any Australian ever will. But I certainly try and understand why they do what they do and how they think.
In your paper that I named at the beginning, you talk about the learning block with Russia, China, North Korea, and who else?
Iran.
Okay. So, and what can you tell us about the blog? Because they're exchanging with the information. They're learning from Russia's war in Ukraine. Are there a real possible threat to the world, to the West?
This is a real problem for many of us because North Korea and China are learning lessons from this war, from the Russians, but also from their observations of Ukrainian innovation. Everyone's looking at Ukraine as well as Russia. Russia has learnt to learn better. They've shared that with Iran, with North Korea and China, how they can speed up adaptation and innovation. It's not just battlefield use of drones. It's things like how might they be able to produce drones in factories more quickly. The Chinese have helped the Russians with that. It might be things like how do they avoid economic sanctions. And with modern technology, they're able to share these lessons very quickly. They can do it almost instantly. So the problem is, when Russia learns a lesson on the battlefield, China, North Korea and Iran can learn the same lesson instantly. That's a problem for all of us.
That's a problem. How the West can just, balance with all of this?
Well, what we've got to do is have our own learning and adaptation systems. I think NATO, America and its allies do a lot of interaction. We just need to do more of it and do it more quickly. And we need to have a good sense of how is Russia learning, where are the areas it's improving, so we can come up with our counters. So intelligence is very important, but just understanding how human organisations learn and adapt is an important part of this. Speaking
about NATO, and talk about the latest incursions of Russian drones and jets into the airspace of NATO countries. You were definitely following that. I don't think that Russia is ready to open a second front, but do you think there is a possibility by 2030, 2035?
Well, firstly, I think those drones over Poland in particular, we're all about probing NATO's reaction to how Russia might do that, how NATO might make big decisions. I was just in Poland and spoke on a show there about this very issue. It wasn't an accident. I know Putin said, oh, no, this was an accident. It was not an accident.
Oh, he's definitely lying.
Well, we know he's lying because his lips were moving. So, you know, this was not an accident. And it was a very deliberate thing, focused at NATO, first and foremost, and then Poland. You know, I think there needs to be a pretty strong response to this. And I think the response of saying if you send your aircraft like they did over Estonia, we may shoot them down. That's a good thing. I don't think Russia are in a position to launch any kind of large-scale attack on Europe at the moment. I mean, Ukraine has more than occupied them. And NATO collectively is far larger, far richer, far more powerful now even than Russia is. So I think what Russia's trying to do is intimidate Europe into not supporting Ukraine as much, intimidate them into acceding to Russia's demands about its role in the European security architecture and everything else. So this is intimidation. It's a Russia that's lacking confidence and is worried. It's not about a Russia that's powerful. It's about a Russia that's weak.
And there was a message from Poland just recently about that this war could last for at least the next 2-3 years. I bet you've heard that. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that? Can you elaborate?
I think, unfortunately, and I hate saying this, it's very possible that the war could go on for another couple of years, and that's the last thing any Ukrainian mum or dad or husband or wife of someone serving in the military wants to hear, or someone who's subject to these awful attacks every night. But I think Putin just will have to be beaten. He doesn't want to give up. Ukraine has shown the way how to do that. We just, in the West, have not always stepped up to the degree that we should in providing everything you need to be able to do that.
Do you think that day will ever come, that we will get everything we need to beat in Putin?
I think it might be coming. Europe has finally realised that it needs to step up, and it's been doing that. You know, to be fair to the countries of Europe, many of them have been providing more assistance. There's, you know, the Scandinavians and others have been providing many assistance packages. The problem we have is the productive capacity of Europe and America just has not been up to the challenge of 21st century massed warfare.
Yes. Well, I'm still thinking about the NATO reaction, and I'm so worried that they are probably not. I know you're saying that they are waking up, but I don't really see enough of the sign.
Waking up is not the same as being awake. You know, waking up is a phase, right?
That's a good one.
So being fully awake and aware and operating is a very different thing. I think we're still in the waking up phase, politically, militarily and industrially in Europe. Certainly in my country, we're very early in the waking up phase. It will still take some time before Europe is as powerful militarily, politically, and industrially is what it needs to be for Russia just to go, no, it's not possible.
General Ryan, speaking about the American President Donald Trump and Tomahawks, do you think when he started to speak about this type of weapon, that Ukraine might get them, do you think it means that he became a pro-Ukrainian, anti-Putin? Or it's about something else inside the United States that we don't see, don't understand? Maybe support, maybe just an interest of rich people? I don't know.
You know, I think President Trump's gone on a bit of a journey this year. I mean, he certainly started off very pro-Russia. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And, you know, the treatment of President Zelensky in the Oval Office was appalling, very disrespectful and just terrible. But I think that he's given President Putin every opportunity to come to the table, and Putin has basically kicked sand in Donald Trump's face, and I don't think he likes that. There is certainly a domestic imperative for the president to either remove America from these wars or achieve peace in these wars. That's a noble objective. I mean, who doesn't want peace in Ukraine? No one wants it more than the Ukrainian people, but it has to be a fair peace. And I think the journey he's gone on is understanding what is a fair peace look like for the Ukrainian people. And I think he's now more aligned with what that might look like from a Ukrainian perspective rather than a Russian perspective. He's not talking about giving up land anymore, which is good. You know, and I think he's talking about Putin saying one thing and doing another, which is true.
Well, definitely.
So he's gone on a journey. I wouldn't quite call him pro-Ukraine yet. I'd probably call him pro-peace, and you can define that any way you want. But I think there is a determination there for him to achieve some kind of peace agreement. I don't want to dig into what his motivations for that might be.
To get a Nobel Prize.
That could be a very long conversation.
Oh, yeah, true. You know, General Ryan, my question... Yeah, you said about the artificial intelligence. So I want to talk about the future of the war. And do you believe that we're heading to the times when there will be only, you know, robotic systems on the battlefield and no human involved? And if that will ever happen with the people on Earth, do you think it's better or it's more frightening?
I don't think we'll see humans being totally replaced in war. And the reason I say that is if you don't have humans, it's actually not war. If all you have is robots, it's a technological transaction. War has to have humans. There has to be a cost for it to actually be a real war. We will see more robots. We will see them being used for a whole range of different things. We will see a larger proportion of robots compared to humans. But, you know, I think we need to be careful about wanting too many robots because war might become more attractive to politicians, not less so. And that's not a future I'd like to see.
And the final one, what at this stage in 2025 you learned from the Ukrainian army that you didn't know or didn't notice before and from their mindset?
Yeah, I think first and foremost that they're incredibly tough. You know, incredibly determined to...
Even now?
Absolutely. I mean, there's all kinds of challenges on the front line with personnel and stuff, but, you know, you see this incredible determination to defend their homeland, to defend their families, to defend their cities, their towns, their territory. That mindset is very important to develop in an army, and the Ukrainian army has that. That doesn't mean there aren't challenges. I mean, there's been a whole range of things with mobilization and these kind of things. But overall, there's this determination, this incredible will in the army that I deeply admire and we should all learn from. I think, too, that it's proved to be a very adaptive institution, that it's learned and adapted and evolved. The Ukrainian military of today is not the same one that existed in 2022. You know, it's a very different organisation. It's still evolving, and it's pulled between its, you know, some Soviet heritage, wanting to be NATO, but also Ukrainian culture and history. And those three things constantly pull it in different directions as it seeks to transform itself. And I think it's important that we, as outside observers, understand those kind of things that are pulling it in different directions at times as it seeks to modernise, transform and win the war.
But it's fair to say that a lot of good, well-trained soldiers in general died in 2022. Mm-hmm.
That's correct. I mean, the professional force, the full-time professional force of 2022 suffered a huge amount of casualties. And unfortunately, that is what happens in big wars. We've seen it in this war, unfortunately, which means a large proportion of the armed forces are mobilised soldiers. Now, that brings a whole lot of skills and different people into the military, which is a good thing. But you can't avoid the tragedy of that first year of war when you lose a lot of your professional soldiers and officers who have a lot of experience. And like I said, we saw it in this war, but we saw it in places like Vietnam. We saw it in the First and Second World Wars. At heart, the army that wins the war is not the same one that starts the war.
You know, I just recently was listening to one of the Ukrainian analysts, and he said that we're living in a very interesting, in a bad way, interesting times, chaotic times, and probably nothing will change in 40, 50 years. So do you think that we're going to see more and more conflicts happening on Earth, despite all the efforts of the American president?
I think we are likely to. I think Russia and China believe now is their time to change the international system. And if they have to do that by force, they appear to be at least prepared to do that. Whether Xi wants to go invade Taiwan next year or not is a different question, but he's thinking about his legacy, and part of his legacy is absorbing Taiwan into the People's Republic of China, even though Taiwan has never been part of the modern China.
Yes.
So I think more conflicts are likely over the next decade, certainly over the next 5 to 10 years. I think this will be, as one writer called it, another bloody century. Unfortunately, just as we saw in the 20th century, I think we may see several large-scale wars in this century. Yeah,
I don't remember who said that a peaceful times is just a pause between wars.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I think, General Ryan, at this point I may say that, well, we have to do our thing. We have to stay on the side of democracy and humanity. And, of course, peace, and just to do what we have to do.
Well, I think so, and I think Ukraine set an example of how to do that. I mean, the president has been very clear multiple times. Ukraine fights by the rules. You've seen Russia engage in incredible barbarism against prisoners of war, against people in occupied territories. Yes. You have not seen that from Ukrainian soldiers. You haven't seen that from Ukrainian people. You've seen them go to great lengths, put themselves at danger to do the right thing, to accord by the laws of armed conflict. And I think, given the existential nature of that fight, that's a very admirable part of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Yeah, true. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, for your insights, and you had the slot of your time to visit our studio. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure, Natalie. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.